Michael STAROBIN. How you doing?
Just fine, Glenn. Nice to see you this morning. How are
Yeah,
things?
things are good with me. Things are great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Creative director at One AU Global Media, a lot of media with space and science and tech and NASA in particular. If Tell me a little bit more about who you are, what you do, what you've been up to.
Sure. As you right, I am the founder and creative director of One AU Global Media. I've been running that for about 16 years, and immediately people are thinking, what does that stand for? So people say, oh, AU, that's gold, but no, has nothing to do with it. One AU is the distance from the Earth to the sun. It's one astronomical unit. So one astronomical unit, global media, One AU Global Media.
Awesome.
So we do a lot of science and technology media, films for government agencies, but also for corporate, industrial. But in our hearts, we're fine artists, so of course we're working on our own stuff, fiction and presentations and artworks. But we have a background, a lot of work in science and technology, and we do things for museums as well. So One AU has been something I'm doing for 16 years or so, but I have another history. I have a news background that goes back a long time, and a news family that I come from. Lots of people in news in my family. And I'm also the senior producer for multimedia and video at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. That is my day job, if you will, and got to have a serious day job, especially in a challenging time such as this. So One AU is a moonlight, but it's a great one, and we take a couple of gigs a year. So that's my short answer, but wow, I can go on with a long answer, including my monthly blog that I publish the first Monday of every month on my website, oneauglobalmedia.com. It's on the subject of creativity and living a creative life. And let's talk some more.
Yeah, so spherical filmmaking. You have a patent on that. You invented spherical filmmaking. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. At the dawn of the millennium, I like saying that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, invented a technology for a round video screen. It's called Science on a Sphere, and their idea was to show data visualizations on a round surface. So if you want to show, say, the Earth from space, you can show an Earth-shaped object, but you could show the moon or Mars. It was pretty sweet. But basically, they were showing round pictures of planets, and they started to animate them using data, say, from weather satellites. You could see the clouds moving on the Earth, or you could see, say, day and night on the moon or on Mars or what have you. And I got to see this working with NASA. I got to take a trip out to the NOAA lab in Colorado, and I said, this is beautiful, but what do you do with it? And they said, well, that's it. You can see planets. And I thought, yeah, but what if you made full motion video using a round surface? All of the rules would change. There'd be no left and right to your frame. You'd have a continuous frame, and you don't have to just use a spherical source material. What if you have, say, a chair sitting on the screen? Well, that's strange. It might be on my side of the screen, but what's on your side of the screen? And if you answer some of those questions creatively and technically, you get some thrilling solutions. And so along with a fabulous creative partner named Vicky Weeks, I worked hard to develop a methodology to make spherical films. And we made the world's first in 2006 called Footprints. And it was named one of the best inventions of the year in Time magazine. And since then, I've made 7 other films and some small videos too, for NASA, for the Department of Energy, for the the Renewable Energy Lab, and for some museums around the world. And it's really been a great adventure.
Yeah, I just pulled that up for, bear with me 1 second. Of course, there we go. Yeah, so Footprints, yeah. And as that film is out.
It is out, and that film goes back a number of years, but it was released, Footprints was released in 2006, May 4th, 2006. And at that time, there were only 7 theatrical screens in the world, but there are now more than 136 all over the planet, and more coming. And there are desktop-sized spherical screens in many classrooms and libraries, numbering well over 1,000. It is a strange format. There's no other way to say it. It's something you have to really see in a theater. A classroom doesn't do it justice, although happy to show you. But it is a theatrical experience in a dark room with this large, almost science fiction orb hanging in front of you in full motion, and it's spectacular and surreal. You wouldn't watch an 1.5-hour feature on it, but for a 15-minute short, it's a thrill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love those films, especially. I would agree. Maybe not 1.5 hours, maybe not 2 hours, but like you said, 15-20 minutes. Yeah, I love those experiences. It's more, it's still creative, but it's more of like this experience in a way.
Quite right. And that experience, I think, is something that's often lost in science media, which is often presented as good for you information. And I think what science media can be is a way to engage you differently. You can get involved emotionally. You can get involved intellectually. You don't have to simply say, I should really pay attention to the facts. The facts are essential. They cannot be adjusted. They are not fungible, but there is an emotional potential for science media. And if there is a subject that I'm not expert in, and there are many, the way to reach me is to show me, why is this interesting? I don't expect you to be able to do heart surgery, but let me explain why it's kind of cool.
Right.
And I think science media has a license to do that, but it doesn't always do that. 2 of the images behind me, Frozen and Loop, are 2 of the 8 films I've made for the Sphere. The other is a more conventional video behind me. But science media, I think, has a lot of potential to engage audiences at an emotional level and a creative level, and that is the thrill.
So how have you been impacted? Say the last 10 months, you know, by the current state of affairs, have you been impacted personally as well as professionally? If you can delve into that.
Yeah, well, it won't be a surprise, Glenn. What a drag. I mean, it sucks. I mean, you know, if you're an artist, you immediately want to be around other artists. You want to be around creative people. And I would say I even want to be around non-artists, but people who are engaged in the world. You know, I love talking to business leaders or government executives because they're full of things they want to do. And those are the roots of story. And I'm a storyteller. I make movies, I write, and I feel energized in that space. And the pandemic has been a buzzkill. You know, it's very, very tough. It is also, at a practical sense, as you certainly know, challenging, because this is how we're talking to each other. We're intermediated by these rectangles in front of us, and that creates certain challenges. You can interview somebody with a long lens, and you can use boom poles, and everybody can wear masks, but I feel that there is a social contract here. I am responsible for keeping you safe. I am responsible for keeping my crew safe. Not to mention myself, but even if I assume risk for myself, there's a social contract, and that makes production hard. And that's been really tough. In NASA, in my private creative world, it's hard. And so this has been a writing year. This has been a reading year. And this has been an alternative media year. I've been developing some things for NASA and for myself, but it's challenging.
Yeah, and you mentioned a social contract. I mean, that's a great way to put it. But for me, it's just it's my reputation. I have to look out for my reputation. And so first and foremost, it's like I have to look out for other people to look out for my reputation. Word of mouth will destroy you. And you've got social media. I mean, with 2020, 2021, you've got social media. People will blast you on social media. People will blast you on this, that, and the other thing. But even before then, you know, the word got out. Don't work with so-and-so. Working with so-and-so, it's good money, but it's a pain in the butt. Don't, you know, be cautious of working with what's his face. You know,
it's absolutely true. And I mean, as media is a personality driven experience. And I
Yeah.
believe you spend your entire life trading on the integrity you develop. And if the message is, you know, that Glenn, I don't know, he's just always trouble, or he doesn't care about us on set, you're toast. But
Yeah.
not to mention, even if no one else wants to deal with you, you can't live with yourself if you know that you're just no good to the people around you or the world around you.
Yeah. And, you know, there was a set, my biggest moneymaker, you know, pre-pandemic was first AD, second AD. And there was one about 10 years ago, I was a real hothead. And someone had to pull me aside and say something about it. And I was like, oh, Christ, you know, and luckily I was blessed. I got another gig as a first AD a couple of years later. I was recommended by that guy.
Interesting.
But then it took me, some time to like redevelop myself. I made a lot of new choices throughout my career, throughout my lifestyle, that really helped with self-consciousness, really helped with leadership skills, really helped with discipline, to where like, then it just dawned on me, like all that other nonsense, it doesn't matter. What's most important is the film, not being a hothead, and so on and so forth. And that guy recommended me to be a first AD. And I think I got a couple more first AD gigs after that. And then pandemic.
That's really generous though of him
Yeah.
also to recognize that you could do the job
Yeah.
and could see past that speed bump and give you
Yeah.
another crack at it. It's pretty cool.
But I found that my personality was kind of warped by his and by some others, because there was other hotheads, and there were those moments of snapping. And so there was a moment where I snapped later. I didn't snap back. It was like a day or two later, I would snap. And so then he would say something, and that's where we got into a dialogue. And I'm like, you did the same thing. And he goes, well, you're right. Okay. But I need you to not. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Because, okay, we want to start splitting hairs. The director and the writer, and the producer, they're the ones that have so much on their plate. They might snap. A creative, the director runs the set creatively, and the AD runs the set more technically. It's like, okay, man, you know, you really are passionate about your vision. You might snap. Let me be like, whoa, bro, relax. And I'm just like, hey, I just need A, B, and C. Hey guys, how are we looking? I need A, B, and C. And it got to a point where it was like, I don't care about other people's negative traits. It's like, okay, great. You're having a bad day. I get that. You know, we can figure out how to fix your bad day. How do we come along on the film? Because right now, the most important thing for me is the film. We're going to make our day. And when I say we make our day, that means on or ahead of schedule,
Sure.
On or under budget. During lunch, talk to me about your day. Tell me what I can do. Tell during lunch, talk to me about your day. Maybe I can help you out, man. You know, maybe I can cut you loose early or something like that. We'll figure it out. Yada, yada, yada. But yeah, I forgot how we got off on the tangent.
Well, but you know, it suggests in a pre-pandemic space
Right.
that who you work with and how you work together is already half the battle. I mean,
the social contract, the word of mouth, and yeah.
To me, the ability for a team to say, look, I'm doing this with you, not just beside you, is such a big difference. And, you know, a trusted team of colleagues is as important as the material itself, because mediocre material can be made to shine. Great material can just sink like a rock. And it is so vital that there is that mutual respect to know that we're all people on this, but we got to pull this together.
Yeah. And you know, you raised a good point. There was so much prep and so much writing I was able to do during this pandemic. But what's funny is you can tell with a lot of content coming out, people are pulling off some production hacks. They're making it work. You can see it in the quality, but not. You can see it in the production quality, but not so much. But you still see some great content, some great ideas, the great the content within it. You know what I'm saying? And
Definitely.
so, you know, like you've got these Netflix documentaries, these 4-part Netflix documentaries coming out. Me and the wife just, and she doesn't even want to continue it. It's so spooky. The crime scene, the disappearance at Cecil Hotel,
Huh.
is this new documentary on Netflix. They're producing that. They're producing that like a 4-part docuseries, a lot like those crime shows. You got your dramatic reenactments. You've got your interviews, your talking heads. You've got your archive photos and videos and news footage and all that stuff, right? And it's just like those ID crime shows. And they're kind of stretching it out and they're kind of beefing it up, but still it's lower budget like those ID crime show, you know, docudramas than it is, instead of making a biopic based on, like, you know, the movie Zodiac with Robert
Right.
Downey Jr., Jake Gyllenhaal. It's a biopic about the Zodiac killer instead of making a ID crime show or crime series about the Zodiac. That's what
Right.
that's what they're turning to now, because they can get away with one camera guy, one audio guy, and that talking head. And then they
Right.
can get away with one camera guy, not even, because all the audio, all the dramatic reenactments now could be MOS. They can be no audio. So you get away with a director, a lighting guy, a camera guy, 1 or 2 or 3 dramatic reenactors that got tested, that got screened. You have 6 people now. There used to be 20. I've worked on all those crime shows before.
That's right.
Used to have a shitload of people on set, and now you can get down to 6. And so instead of making that big budget Hollywood biopic on this murder case, people are really experimenting with that crime reenactment, that docudrama crime reenactment, ID-esque kind of production. And not to go on this big tangent, a year or 2 before the pandemic, I decided, hey, I've been working on all these crime shows. I've been working on all these other people's productions. I've been ADing on so many other people's films, but I want to like produce something. So how can we do that with like $5, $10? We got no money, you know, to risk, but we have a few bucks to risk. Okay, well, we have social media, we have the internet. I can reach out to a lot of local actors, a lot of local voice actors. Okay, what if I took the vision? You know, you've got big Marvel movies, and then you've got, you know, small independent features, and I flipped it, because I've worked on so many of these ID crime shows. We can do an ID crime show based in Marvel. We can do an ID crime show based in DC universe, one based in Marvel universe. But we do like these crime show episodes based on these villains, and we cut the production down. It's only like 5% of the production of what other show would be.
Right.
But those are based on comics, right? So all my other films that are original, all my other scripts that are completely original, do them like a motion comic. And there's another way to, like, I'm only spending like 5% of the budget, which really is just time.
But what you're really saying is that when absolutely forced to, is creatives think of new solutions. And we're talking here about a total paradigm shift for production. But I know, you know, this, it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
You know, when you make these choices either by necessity or by creative motivation, sometimes they are the same thing, sometimes they're not, you also eliminate certain things. So going to like micro crews and do most things yourself means something takes a hit. Yeah. And it's a very, very tough thing. And on the one hand is you can get something out the door and it might be fresh and it might be all yours. And on the other hand, you got it out the door, but it didn't have kind of the power that you wanted it to have. And I do thoroughly appreciate what you're describing, but I'm also encouraged to hear that you found a way to say, I have to do my own thing. Is there a way forward? And Glenn, that's a very cool moment to find a solution to get your thing out.
And also to touch upon what you were saying about keeping the set safe and healthy, looking out for the crew and cast. You had that social contract. For me, it was the discipline for a long time. For me, it was the discipline to say no to gigs.
That's right.
I love to be on set. I got to get out there and make some money acting. I got to get out there and make some money ADing or producing or production managing, ACing, changing, swapping lenses, hanging up lights, whatever. And there was a lot of gigs. Well, during the pandemic, there were quite a few gigs actually, believe it or not, as we start progressing in June and July, I think.
Yep.
And I had to turn them down. I said, listen, I can't, because if I put myself at risk, that puts my wife and my baby boy at risk, and I can't
That's right.
do that. Oh, yeah, it was, you know, and then, but still, you know, no matter how safe you are, I still got COVID. The wife and baby boy still got COVID.
Wow.
I got my second shot just recently. Long story short, I'm in the DC National Guard, the whole Capitol thing. We don't really have to go too much into depth there, but because of the Capitol thing, not directly, but somewhat half directly, half indirectly, I got COVID because someone else got COVID because of the Capitol thing.
Sure.
Wow.
And
then I brought it home to the baby boy. Thank God it didn't go past this household, but the baby boy kicked it before us. You know, he just in and out. He had a fever for 2 days. He had diarrhea for 2 days, and then boom. And
wow. Lucky for all of you.
But you know, he's 10 months. It was 10 months at the time, maybe 11 months at the time. He can't talk. He can't say, "Dad, I have aches and chills." He was, but from what we could tell, he was just happy-go-lucky. There was nothing really bothering him. He was still just this chipper, like laughing and giggling, and you know, like that thing that kids do. So the wife was bedridden for 3 days. I was bedridden for 4 days. I mean, my wife kicked it quicker than I did. She kicked it better than I did.
Good for her.
Yeah. I mean, but see, now at this point, it's like, okay, we're ready. I'm ready to get back to do whatever, whenever, wherever. But I have to take into consideration now the other people on set still going to wear a mask, still going to
must
a test would. We're not contagious, and I think we kicked it, but a test would still come back, I think, positive for 90 days out.
Correct.
So I had to. So I tell people, I already had it. I'll wear a mask. I'm immune to it, and I'm not contagious. But
although the science is still unclear about contagiousness, I mean, you know, in terms of transmission, but I don't want to wax epidemiological. I'm not an expert, but what I read suggests that is inconclusive. Remember, we only have 1 year of anybody even knowing about this virus, let alone doing research on it. There isn't a long history of research, and I think it's all very, very much in our benefit collectively as a society to err on the side of caution, because look at the downside.
Yep.
You know, it's like, I'll drive with my headlights off. What the heck?
Multiply it by 2.
Exactly.
And that's what, and going back to, like, okay, when I went and got my first shot, they did this whole briefing. They said, oh, now that I got once I get my second shot in a month from now, do I have to wear a mask? And the guy was like, yeah, you got to wear a mask. And not only that, consider everything in 2020 to be through the summer. And I was like, of 2021. I'm like, okay, through the summer of 2021, 2022, we're going to start looking at sort of not being so masky and social distancing. 2022.
Right.
That's my math.
Right.
So
that's right.
It's still going to be social distancing. It's still going to be masks.
I think that's absolutely right.
Until the spring of 2022.
And if everybody says, yes, we know it sucks. It sucks. We want to see people. You want to go out to a party with your friends. You want a million things. I miss going to movie theaters. But you know what? Look at the downside. And if everybody gets on board, it goes away faster. But if people resist this, we can just keep this going for years.
Yeah. Well, to avoid pseudoscience, you know, we're filmmakers. Have you been back on set or back in the field, back on location?
A little bit, not a lot. I did a couple of videos where I was talent doing stand-ups with one person on camera and, you know, wireless microphone for walk and talks, cut in with video that I shot intermediated through screens. And, you know, B-roll was shot in the field, but interviews were not. It's very, very limited material. It's simply hard. Budgets go up because of time and resourcing. And for big productions, everybody's taking a powder, except at the nosebleed level, or at the series level that finds some sort of strange little solution like the Netflix show you're talking about. Yeah. And a lot of things I've been working on now, I am doing at my own computer, a production for NASA that I can do with tons of files that either I'm getting from other sources or that I've been collecting over some time or working with colleagues to collect for my own business. I will say, I shouldn't bury the lead, but here I have. In the spring, after the pandemic really got started, I enterprised on my own and my business a documentary, it would fit into an hour programming slot, and did a documentary on the beginning of the pandemic. And I got footage from participants all over the country, and they supplied it to me, and I put it together. And the film is about contending with this new global pandemic from all of our isolation. And this was in the first 3 months of the pandemic, before we knew where things were going. That movie is now out. Look for it on Vimeo. It's called Navigating the Curve. It was just named an official selection in the Spotlight Short Film Awards, and 2 days ago was pre-selected for the Dumbo Film Awards. So we'll see how we do in competition there. But Navigating the Curve is a documentary on the earliest days of the COVID pandemic in America, and came out in the spring of 2020.
All right, and I'll be sure to put the links of that in the description. So
awesome,
that's clickable. Definitely check that out. I don't know, like I have like 5 viewers, so you'll get like 5 more.
Yeah, my stats will go up by 5.
No, I'm kidding. I think I have a few more than that, but I'm very self-deprecating. You always want bigger, better viewership, and who knows, at some point this might happen. But
this could be the breakout moment, Glenn. You're going to have me back in the fall.
I do plan, and it's funny. We'll talk offline after this, and I do have like this big grandiose plan. But it's funny you mentioned that, because me and my colleagues, we tried this podcast a couple times before, and like you said, during this pandemic, it was about writing, it was about experimenting, it was about staying creative, and that's what this was. This was like, okay, what is it? Third tries a charm, second tries a charm, third time's a charm, fourth time's a charm, fifth time's a charm.
Right.
So that's what this was. We just tried it again, and you and a whole slew of other folks were like, yeah, why not? Because I definitely took advantage of the quarantine. I definitely took advantage of like the everyone staying home, and just, hey, jump on, chat for an hour or two. Like that's what you would do with your mom, or that's what you would do with a buddy. And this has been kind of going on strong. We'll see how it progresses. And I'm kind of taking notes on like maybe some more progression type ideas for the show. But yeah, but what's next on the agenda? What's the next set of goals? What's next on the agenda for Michael STAROBIN?
So I mentioned I publish a blog every first Monday of every month. That's not going away. So that's, I wouldn't say a new agenda item. That's agenda that is continuous. But in terms of big things that have my attention is inside my day job at NASA, which is a thrilling gig. And I've been doing it for a very long time. I work with some superb colleagues. I'm right now in my portfolio, I have 2 missions that I chase. And most people don't realize that beyond astronauts on space station and the occasional rovers on Mars, and by the way, I don't know when this podcast will air, but NASA's new rover arrives on Mars next week to join 2 others that showed up this week. So there's a big week in Mars history, but I digress. Besides astronauts and Mars, NASA does a ton of really exciting research on a lot of subjects. And so my portfolio right now is collaborating on the James Webb Space Telescope. This is the successor to Hubble, the Hubble Space Telescope. So James Webb is the newest, most extraordinary telescope that humanity has ever built. It's massive. It's absolutely colossal. It's arguably one of the most sophisticated anything that humanity has ever built. It's decades in the making. It's going to launch into space on the world's largest rocket, launched from a science fiction location, the French European spaceport in French Guiana, South America. Why there? It's because it's flying on a European rocket called an Ariane 5, and it's going to launch this October. And I'm part of the team that's telling its story. And my hands are full to overflowing with stuff to do on that mission, and it's very exciting. I'm also the director of some of the live coverage when it launches and in some of the advanced media events. But that's a giant thing. The other thing is I am a producer for an Earth science mission at NASA called PACE. PACE looks at life in the ocean from space. You can determine an awful lot about the health of the planet from looking at trillions of microscopic plants as they reflect light, they emit light back into space. And by seeing what chemistry and aerosols and particulates and color they are reflecting, you can make all sorts of inferences about chemistry, about climate change, especially the health of the oceans. It's very, very technical science, but it's incredibly important. PACE launches in a couple of years. It's a very big mission. It's largely unknown by the general public, but I think most things in life are things we don't know about. Do you really have a clue where your toaster was made? I mean, you don't know, and that doesn't make you wrong. It's just to say somebody does, and somebody designed it. Well, this is vital science on the health of the planet, and I get to tell its story too. Although I've told some of my superiors that these two trains are on collision course, so there's going to have to be a jockeying for primacy in the next couple of months. Those are on my agenda for my own private life, which is now getting incredibly squeezed with these things. I am working on some of my own material. There's a long form piece that I'm very excited about. It's about 45 minutes of script written, and I'm pushing hard around the edges to build out that script. And then it's just a question of, a few $1 million of funding. If you're offering, Glenn, I really appreciate you writing that check.
Yeah. Oh, well, what I can do is I can just spread the word, and
that's it.
That's the most I can do. I could probably,
I'm happy to take a meeting.
Absolutely. So going back to some of your previous work, Osiris Rex, there was you worked on landing on an asteroid. You did the media of that. Tell me a little bit more about Osiris Rex.
Sure. Again, in the first decade of the millennium, this was really just a cocktail napkin doodle by some engineers and scientists. Can we land on an asteroid? And what if we brought a sample back to Earth? And so in the very early days, I made a film that was essentially describing the mission. And I shot this film and I set it as if it were like a 1950s sci-fi presentation with reporters in fedora hats, and all in black and white, except for the animations that we developed about what could it be. And that was all in color, of course, because it was full motion, CG. But then everything on set was done in this kind of period piece on black and white, looking at why go to an asteroid. Fast forward, the mission was ultimately funded. It got congressional and NASA funding. It changed its name from Osiris to Osiris Rex, and they launched a probe to an asteroid called Bennu. And the idea was to touch down on Bennu, an extremely small object that had very, very little gravity, collect a sample, and then bring it back to Earth. And that probe was successful in October of this past year, just a few months ago. October 2020, it touched down on Bennu, collected a sample, lifted off, and then very soon it's about to begin its journey back to Earth. And it's going to arrive at Earth in 2023 and parachute down to the desert in Utah. And this is an extraordinary mission. And I had an opportunity not only to make the original film when it was in its early funding days, but I got to direct live coverage of the contact with the asteroid. Other producers have been involved in between time. I've touched the mission here and there, telling some stories. I did a series of documentaries interviewing their scientists, very short form pieces, and a few other things between here and there. But the live coverage was a thrill, and it was dozens of engineers and scientists talking about it in real time as we got telemetry from the spacecraft, and it's a magical mission.
So you said second decade of the millennium, 2010, 2011.
The original film that I made, I think I made it in 2007, believe it or not.
Okay.
But they I'd have to look at when the exact launch date was, but these are very complicated missions between.
And
they
like,
take a long time to travel too.
With a freaking 13 to 16 year, it's like, oh, 16 years later, we get to finish the film, right?
That's something.
Essentially, or finish the mission. And yeah, it just baffles my mind. Like, this drone travels out there. Is someone constantly monitoring that? Is someone constantly remote controlling this or something?
That's a good question.
Or
you can't think of it as remote control, but you can think of it as like constant instructions. So there is some autonomous control, but you can't joystick an instrument that far away, because now this will blow your mind. The distance between the asteroid and the Earth changes as the Earth and the asteroid are moving through space,
right,
in different orbits at different speeds, in different places on what's called the ecliptic, which is the plane of the solar system. And so at the time that we made contact with the asteroid, the travel time for a speed of light was 20 minutes. And you can't joystick something with that kind of latency.
Right.
To put it in perspective, the speed of light from our sun to the Earth is about 8.5 minutes. So it took longer to send a signal to the spacecraft than it takes from sunlight to get from the sun to Earth. So there's no way to fly it. You have to send commands in advance.
You have to type in this, right, this command, and hope it takes.
That's right. And it's going to have to do it by itself.
But now here, and I don't mean to interrupt, but
please.
Okay, but I put in this command, but then we at NASA have to know, I have to put this command in by 5 o'clock, or it won't receive it but the further it gets, I got to send the command sooner.
That's right.
For it to turn a left.
That's right.
That's like mind-boggling. That's why I stick to just acting and filmmaking, man, because it's like at this point. These are. I mean, people know this from kind of the legend and from also popular culture, but these are smart people, and it's a thrill to work with them, and they think differently than you and I perhaps on certain subjects, but it's fascinating because there are certain things that the creative classes offer to them that they look at me and they say, I've never thought of doing it like that to tell our story. And what I really have come to realize is that there is no way you want me flying your spacecraft. I am not that guy. But there are things that I can do and that you can do and that others in our creative sphere can do that they can't. And I wouldn't say that we're equivalent. I would say that we're different. And that's in itself such a pleasure, because when there's really respect among disciplines, there is the ability to do exciting things. Imagine if OSIRIS-REx was doing what it's doing and nobody were there to translate that story to your neighbor. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, I went out to an asteroid, got a piece and brought it home. But that doesn't do it justice. And somebody has to make that translation. They're not equivalent, but the differences themselves are exciting. And I always feel it's a privilege to get to work on these missions. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I would definitely. And it's just so unique. It's just so extraordinary, especially when you come to realize and understand the rarity. You know, every once in a while we'll see in the news, oh, we're sending another probe to Mars. And maybe at some point it's like, oh, another one. And the general public might not kind of appreciate that, maybe, but I think a lot of, I'd say like more people do appreciate it than not. But then again, when you start to like involve yourself and understand the complexities of this and even document that and in a way kind of point a light at how ridiculous and yet extraordinary it is, kind of poke humor at it, poke fun at it, and yet show the extraordinary vastness and complexity of a single mission.
That's right.
You know, there's a lot of layers. There's a lot of layers to peel back when it comes to certain productions and certain examinations.
And, you know, I say this sometimes in talks. I say, you know, assuming we're not in a pandemic, you know, you go to the movies with your girlfriend or your boyfriend and you say, What'd you think of that? It was kind of cool. You want to go get a pizza? Yeah, I like the part where they did and 300 people just worked for 2 years, 60 hours a week to do that. And they spent $90 million. You're like, yeah, it was kind of cool. It was cute. Let's go get a pizza. And
Yeah.
it's easy to consume the end result of massive amounts of work. But if you've done the job right, nobody knows how much work it took. And I think cinema is, and television to some extent, and any creative discipline is like that. I mean, if you go into a decent restaurant and you order, number 12 on the menu and they bring it out, there's a lot of work that went into all of the supply chain and craftsmanship and the pans and the stoves and the ingredients and the seasoning and the practice. But you say, oh, this is yummy. And, the amount of work that goes into easy consumption is always invisible if you do it well. And that's true at NASA. Look at those astronauts. Hey, they just got to space station. It was a heroic effort to do it. And the same for Osiris. Same for JWST, the biggest, most extraordinary of them all.
Yeah.
That's coming this fall. It's going to be the story on your radar screen. You will hear about this. It is astounding. But it's true for any big creative enterprise. And I have to tell you that singular point about requiring so much attention to detail to make something look effortless is one of the main elements that keeps my creative engines running, is because I love that moment of seemingly effortless initiative and endeavor, because we all know it's not effortless.
Yeah. And it's almost like cinema sells itself short. The art of cinema is selling itself short.
Correct.
The Marvel movies took Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame probably took 3 years combined to make, and all this extensive time. And then it's like a boom, a movie. Yeah, it's awesome. Loved it. Cool. Let's go get a beer. Like exactly what you said. And it's almost but at the same time, they made their money back. But
they made their money back.
They made well over their money back.
And look, a theater director I care about said, I think rather famously, that if the audience is seeing how you did your job wrong. It's not up to the audience to know how hard it was. It's up to you to make it not look hard. And that's the craft. But I think that's true also of any creative initiative. I mean, do you want to go into a building downtown and think, look at those support beams? Well, they're really holding up a lot of weight.
Yeah.
You'd want to think like, oh, this is a great atrium.
Yeah.
Look, 40-foot ceilings. How'd they do that? And you don't want to know how hard it is.
Yeah. Well, there's a show, me and the wife watched it during the pandemic. There's a show called Away with Hilary Swank, and she plays an astronaut.
Oh, yes.
And I think it's a 10 episode, hour-long episodes, maybe 45 minutes, or I forget how long each episode is. And it was so well done. It was so impactful. It stuck with us. It was a special series. There's not going to be a season 2. Special series about a group of astronauts trying to get to Mars. And you see every step and every problem and every hiccup and every roadblock, and they work their way through it. And you get a couple of flashbacks about their personal life and how that negatively impacted the mission or positively impacted the mission. But you're right, it was, who knows how long it took to shoot this show.
Right.
But I think the beauty is if something impacts you and sticks with you. I think that where these missions, these NASA missions, where they sell themselves short is you don't see how much goes into it, and people don't appreciate it. You're right. If you do see all this stuff, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
But if it's done in such a way that it's so impactful to somebody that it still sticks with them months later, that the finale, the climax of this series was so impactful to us. It blew us away. Like, we were talking about it for weeks, and I even still think about it. The first thing that comes to my mind when talking to you about NASA, talking about space travel, is this show.
Interesting.
And Apollo 13 as well.
Sure.
Apollo 13 was just so impactful, and they kind of touched upon a little bit of how this and that and the other thing's done, how to constantly fix, and one step forward, 2 steps back, this conundrum that we have in life, and especially with Away. We finally solved this problem. We got 2 more now. Oh, what the crap,
Right.
but Away was so freaking impactful for me and the wife that I think that's where obviously they're not showing you how they made the movie, and obviously they're kind of fast forwarding through a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years of prep for this mission, and they were probably gone for another 3-4 years.
Sure, they've condensed events to make a
and
show.
They've condensed events to make a movie, to make a show, but I think the beauty is to find that way to make all those things stick. And finally, it's over. Finally, I don't know, no spoilers, but finally the show's come to a climax and you're like, oh my God. It's just that huge fireworks, the huge kind of, whatever, the end of it.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's the beauty of that fine crafting of the project, the production, the film, the series.
Listen, you've been on set many times. You know that even when you've got your breakdown just totally worked out for today, all the gear is going to be there. Everyone's prepped. Costumes are solid. Lighting's great. And some crazy thing is just going to conspire against your day.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing you can do. And you just don't know if you can't push it to tomorrow because you only had, police blocking the street for that day or whatever it is. There are those people who find a way without getting anybody hurt or getting arrested, and there are those people who fold, and it's a very, very tough thing, but the audience should never know. And that is, I think, the distinction between excellence and trying. And I don't disparage the trying component, because most things in the world I'm just trying because I'm not expert. And simultaneously, those things that I consider myself pretty knowledgeable about, I once wasn't. And there's only one way to get good at something, which is to keep doing it. It's only Mozart who gets born that way. The rest of us work hard. And even he worked hard.
Yeah.
And I worked incredibly hard. My feeling is, if you want somebody else to spend their time and their money, especially their time, it's up to you to make it effortless.
Yeah. And you raised a good point. Okay, like all these hiccups happened. We only have the cops blocking the street. And for me, I always use the word discipline, but for me, it's the discipline before for me, it was the discipline to say no to gigs.
Yes.
Just had to, can't get sick, can't bring it home. Well, it happened anyway, but that was the discipline. And before there was discipline where I would be an AD, I'd be directing a music video and something wasn't working. And I say, okay, the discipline is willing to make sacrifices.
Yep.
Just to complete it. And like you said, let's go back to Indiana Jones. The first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders.
And he had food poisoning. He had to do this big whip fight with that big dude with the sword.
Yeah.
It was even his idea. How about I just shoot him and then we move on?
Right.
And it was hilarious.
The day. Yeah.
And it was hilarious.
Perfectly.
It was one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie. One of the best, like kind of sarcastic, like what the heck kind of moments in the movie. But there's a reason for that. And they came up with a way to simplify the whole day. And then he would go, recover from food poisoning. And like, little bits like that, stick with my mind. You have to have the discipline. We're not going to have all these big explosions. We're not going to have this big shootout. The cops are only here for 5 hours. We've got the street blocked. We're just going to have to dumb it down. Handheld. Take them off the sticks. Handheld. Your line. Close up, 2 shot. We're out.
And what's interesting, I think, as you say that, we may feel like curses, we've dumbed it down, but since nobody knows what you were going to do, that was the shot you have. So Exactly. It looks like, oh, they had a plan.
Yeah. And, you make it work. And, there's a way to be dramatic. Also, think about how many movies we've seen with so much dramatic stuff happened off screen.
Yes.
You
Yes,
see what I'm
indeed.
saying? There's some horror movies that have to go over the top and show heads exploding and show guts everywhere and blood spraying. But there's been scenes in, you know, some Scorsese films and some Tarantino films and some whatever films, other folks' films, where it was a close-up of the guy pulling the trigger, some blood splatters on his face, and that's all it.
That's
You
it.
know how
Right.
cheap that is?
Right.
You know how
But
cheap?
Spielberg was, you know, in Jaws. I mean, this is
Never saw the shark.
Yeah, you never saw the shark, and it was genius. But you're absolutely right. If you really think it through, you can get a lot of mileage out of not a whole lot of action. And
You're right. You brought up Spielberg's shark in Jaws, and that's another great point. Is they had so many issues with the mechanics of the shark. They had so many issues with the aesthetics of the shark. It was driving them nuts. Where they played around you not seeing the shark, and that's even greater fear. And then they finally showed it at the climax. We need a bigger boat.
right.
Like, this thing is huge, and you finally saw how huge it was. And but, you know, going back to like the close-up of the guy pulling the trigger and a little bit of blood splatters on his face, that is
Sure.
dramatic.
Yep.
This guy's dark. This guy is a bad dude. This guy's evil. That's cheap. It was so cheap. You saw nothing else.
You raise an interesting thing, though, is if you have the confidence to have, say, the close-up of the trigger and a little blood splatter, you have to think poetically, because if you're thinking literally, I show the shoot, I show the impact, I show someone's face, that's all. We know, we've seen plenty of things that are effective that way, but to think poetically is to evoke something that the viewer brings to the experience. And that's always stronger, because we as people think as metaphors much more powerfully than we think as literal presentations. That's
Think
why
poetically.
Yeah, it's right. Thinking about the hunt for the mammoth told at the cave at night around the fire keeps a community together. But being out hunting the mammoth is all day in the hot sun, hiking through the savannah, carrying a spear, trying to bring down that damn mammoth. But when you tell the story back at the fire, all you get are certain poetic expressions. It was so hot, we hiked for hours. My spear was heavy and I had a splinter. And now people are bringing themselves into it with their own imagination. And it's the experience that they had because they all ate that night from that hunt. But the story is in itself the more powerful component, and because it empowers people to go out on future hunts. And I think that way of thinking is vital to almost all creative enterprise. And I don't just mean artistic enterprise like cinema, which is something we love, but if you want to go to an asteroid, you have to think of its implications more than just the mechanics of how many feet per second and what's the coefficient of pressure versus gravity. You have to think about what are the implications, and that's thinking poetically.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you reduce it to practice. What lens do we use? And do I need a floppy over here? And, you know, does somebody have water? You know, my makeup's running, whatever.
So your work is very much a mix of science and tech with creativity and production. What drives you? What drove you to get into that? You know, for me, I love Marvel movies. I love action. I love sci-fi. But what drives you? What drove you to get into this mix of science and art, tech and creativity?
When I was a kid, knew I was going to be an astronaut. I knew it. I was good to go. And it turned out that balancing a checkbook was complicated math. So I was like, wow, this calculus stuff is going to push me back on my heels. So, all right, not astronaut. I guess I have to make a career change. And that's when I was 7. So at 8, I'm kidding. I decided that science was always interesting to me. And if I couldn't be an astronaut, I want to be in the sciences. But I really wasn't suited to that. I was attracted to the arts. My family are, as I mentioned, from the journalism world. They are storytellers, essentially. And I went into the family business, essentially. I was a journalist for a while. And I was always fascinated and compelled by science. In a journalistic job, I started the science desk at a now defunct news service, and I wanted to tell those stories. But I spent a lot of time in high school and in college, and then after college in the performing arts, and also did some acting, probably not as much as you, but some, and loved it. And these two worlds just didn't fit always. You couldn't pursue them simultaneously easily. And then I started to find a way. I was working with NASA, a terrific gig, a fantastic opportunity, full of creative people. I was getting my science and engineering fix, but deep down, I'm really, it took me a while to realize I'm really an artist. I write. I have been writing my whole life. I love books. The quarantine has had one great thing for me, which is, oh, I don't have to explain that I'm stuck in the corner reading a book. That's a comfortable place for me. I can spend days thinking about art and invention, and that fuels me. But the journalistic gene is a big engine. Telling stories, even if you make them up, I think is a vital thing. And I believe strongly that fiction is one of the best ways to get at the truth, which is different than fabrication. You know, we talk a lot in the culture these days about truth and things that are artificially contrived, and the horrible expression alternate facts. And regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, I won't drag your viewers into that debate. I will say that fiction is a different conversation. And the thing about the creative world of a painting, which is a single frame that you make up yourself with paint, or photography, or cinema, or a novel, is that you are synthesizing your experiences, your perceptions of culture and time, the world, relationships, to say something, even if it's a comedy. You're saying something synthetically, and that, done well, is getting at underlying truths, because it's condensing the essential parts of the day. I mean, nobody cares, you know, Glenn, if you wore your blue socks or your white socks when you stumbled down to the kitchen this morning to make coffee. So that wasn't an essential detail. But when you got to the kitchen and there was no coffee, and you're like, oh gosh, I got that interview today and I gotta have a cup of coffee, that's a moment of narrative propulsion. And only for a moment, but a little moment. And I love finding those moments totally made up that help propel the conversation. That's what news does at its best, but that's also what storytelling does at its best.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Awesome. So we're about in the middle of February. Is it too late to say Happy New Year?
Nah, no,
No?
I'm good all the way till like June.
June, right? Okay. All right. So with that in mind, what's the new year, new you? What's the new normal, new Michael, new year, new you? What comes to mind when I say that?
I think that we have to get away from saying, how can I get back to the way things were? How can I recreate what was working for us? You know, I was on a path. My kids were on a path, or my neighbors are on a path. That world is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I mean, my heart aches. Legitimately, I do not part with things that matter to me easily. So I do not part with people easily. But that world is gone, and it is recreating something that's not just sad. We have to find a way to maintain a discipline that we're doing constructive things, not just survival things. We have to find a way to be paying attention to reconstructing our communities and our families. And as creatives, we have to find a way to not just like poke around the edges and survive, but we have to find a way to do some of the ambitious things that we wanted to do before. Part of that is everybody working together to defeat the pandemic, so that we can start acting like people again and sitting shoulder to shoulder around the campfire and telling stories of hunting the woolly mammoth, but some of it is grander enterprise. For me, this is staying focused, not losing sight of bigger dreams, finding a way to keep them moving, somehow finding a way not to get blue by being in isolation, just seeing the same few people in my house, and trying to adapt to new ways of behaving that are not marking time to get back to what used to be, because that day has gone.
Yeah.
People are no longer going to ignore virtual meetings now that they've learned they can, but I don't want to do it forever.
After they see the returns on the budget of these events, because for the last 4 years, I've been doing a lot of live streaming of corporate industrial events, but for this last year, it was all virtual. And a lot of these clients, a lot of these, organizations and associations, they're going to look at that budget for the last year.
Yeah.
And they were like, hell, man, sure, make things hybrid, but
yeah.
I don't see why we would go back to fully blowing millions on a 3-day event when we're blowing only 100,000.
I know, and yet, in December I was giving a big talk at a huge conference I was talking about the collision of art and science and how they can talk to each other, essentially. And I was part of a panel, and typically that talk would have been in San Francisco, and I love San Francisco and I love going to this conference, and I've been off and on going for almost 20 years. This time I'm presenting, and it was virtual. And I was like, okay, of course I'll still be there. I mean, but you're right. On one hand, a great deal of money and energy was not expended. And at the same time, I like being able to sit at a small table drinking coffee with people I haven't seen since last year, and to be in person. That tension is enormous. But you are correct. Corporate budgets are going to say, yeah, we'll take it virtual. It's $2.5 million we're going to save.
That sucks. And
it does.
And it's just, again, it's one of those moments. I've been in that spot so many times. I'm finally the one that's going to be receiving an award. I'm the one that's finally going to be a star in this thing, and something happened, and that's not going to happen, or it's got to be virtual. And it's like, but you still do it, right? You still do it.
You got to do it because you got to be participating, or you're not part of it at all. But the
2020
balances.
This was the 2020 American Geophysical Union's.
That's correct. The American Geophysical Union, AGU.
Okay, and isn't that the unit that you were talking about?
Oh, that's funny.
Or is that AU?
It's funny. It does have the same initials, but no, it's different. So AGU, the American Geophysical Union, and my company is called 1AU, Global Media. But this case, it's Astronomical Unit, and that is Geophysical Union. Go figure.
Okay, all right.
Just to make sure people are paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating because okay, what AU? Global Media, AUGM.
One more time.
Or AGU, or 1AU.
Don't anyone say I wasn't prepared.
You're definitely prepared. You're definitely prepared.
That's
so
right.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, to touch upon what you were saying about like there is no real new normal ever. I remember 9/11. 9/11 for me was the big thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure my mom and dad, they remember Vietnam and the Cold War, but I think the biggest thing for my mom was a microbiologist her whole career. She remembers AIDS. That was the big thing for her.
Yeah.
The AIDS scare. And so everything is like so her germophobia went up like, a trillion. And she implemented that in this, you got to look out because there's, now there's AIDS, and then in 2005 there was N1H1 and SARS and the bird flu and so on and so forth. For me, it was 9/11. Things drastically changed. And I remember how airports drastically changed. I did maybe two, if not 3 international flights as a young man prior to 9/11. And then it was like, oh my God, the lines are out the freaking door. This is taking forever. You got to get there. I remember picking people up or maybe getting picked up and they were sitting there right there in front. And now it's like, keep going, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving.
Yeah.
You know, you can't stop for a second unless they're standing right there waiting for you. Throw in the luggage and then drive off. And that was post 9/11. The technology between 2000 and 2005. I mean, VHSs were around forever. I remember DVDs. Oh, the new big thing. Finally, DVDs. Video game systems kind of, you know, progressing. Nintendo to
Blu-ray DVDs.
Oh, Blu-ray all of a sudden, right? But
Yeah, right.
but with 9/11, it was the cell phones were like and cameras and data and all that stuff. Fast forwarded so quick within 10 years as opposed to the 80s and 90s. So much faster tech available within those 10 years.
And I'll say something of these devices, which you and I live on. You know, anybody who's watching this podcast can presume that we coordinated our calendars and how to set this up, all with these devices, that astounding technology. And so we work in film and video, and we deal with high tech all the time. And you're right, there was this giant change just a few years ago. But I have to say, they are also one of the biggest dilemmas, because as much as they enable, they suck so much time and bandwidth. I find that if I'm writing or I'm editing, if I'm deep into a timeline and I'm editing, when I really need my focus, the last thing I want is someone to be texting me. It's not their fault, but I feel like, what? And I've lost just some of that subtle edge, and it takes me a little time to get back into it. And we are all fragmented all day long with tweets, Facebook, LinkedIn, text messages, video, the streaming thing you should get back to. You got multiple windows open. Somebody's trying to FaceTime you. I mean, all day long. And then it's like, oh, you know what? I'm kind of hungry. I should go get some. And by that time, it's very hard to focus. And sure, I'm a tech junkie. I love some of these cool toys, but at the same time, they are the death of good creativity. I love what Steve Jobs once said about Facebook and social media, and he died before it totally exploded, but he said the only people who have those accounts are those people who really need them. And I thought, that's kind of genius, because he doesn't need them. And that lets you focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
I need them. I still need them. So, you know, you can click on @MichaelStarobin, join me on Twitter, Insta.
Yeah, I mean, the wife is like, why don't you ever post pictures of the baby boy or us? And I'm like, that's not what I use it for.
Yeah, right.
I need it, but I need it for marketing. I need it for promotion. I need it for, like, trying to grow build a viewership. And I said, I'm not so much all that personal private stuff on my social media.
Right.
But I'll do a little bit, since she insists, but not so much. But yeah, I agree. I can't agree with you more that you're right. There are people that need it, and it's people that have nothing going on, or it's people that need it as a marketing tool.
Right.
They need to push their stuff to that next level, because during the quarantine, there was a few celebs that were getting on TikTok and getting on Instagram and doing things, but really you don't see a lot of celebs pushing stuff out weekly, a bunch of times weekly, because they really don't need to.
That's right. I mean, don't want to be hypocritical without calling it out. I mean, I use these tools because precisely it's valuable for me to say, hey, my documentary is out. Hey, it just won a little award. You should check it out. The only way I'm going to get to an audience is to say so. Yep. But it is to say, what a double-edged sword, because that time I'm spending crafting these perfect little jewels on Instagram and Twitter is for real time. It starts to add up, and it's taken me away from just thinking clearly or doing the work itself. And I can't pretend that, yeah, I do need it. I do use it. Doesn't mean I like it. Although I like all of you who've just signed up today at Michael Starobin on Twitter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough. You kind of touched upon a lot of things, but if there was one last point, one last bit of advice you want to put out there, what would that be?
Read something that is outside of your domain of experience. If you are into football, read something about the natural world. If you never read fiction, pick up a novel. If you think poetry is just for geeks or teenagers, go get a volume of poetry. Read something that's not your normal thing, because only by brushing into other ideas do you expand the things that you already know.
Wow, that's a first for this show. Yeah, that's definitely a great idea. Grab something outside your norm.
Yeah. And I would
Absolutely.
say that about even the people you know. When it is safe to be with people, give an extra 30 seconds to someone who you normally would roll your eyes at and don't. I mean, I tell myself that all the time, is don't, and find a way to take them seriously. You don't have to agree. Just find a way to take them seriously. And that's a lot, because that will just go miles, not only into rebuilding the world, but into also expanding you.
Hell yeah. Awesome, Michael. Well, I can't thank you enough. Of course, any plugs, links, socials you want to put out there? You mentioned some, but throw them out there again.
It's on Twitter. It's at Michael STAROBIN. At 1AU Global Media is another Twitter handle. You can check out my website at 1auglobalmedia.com. You know, you saw it 10 minutes ago. We're doing it again. You can check out my documentary film called Navigating the Curve. You can go to Vimeo, VIMEO, and search in the search window, Navigating the Curve. It'll come right up to the top. I don't know what else to say there. Coming up on NASA, JWST this fall, one of the biggest missions in human history.
All right, Michael. Well, thanks again so much for coming on. I learned a lot. Continue to be inspired. All his links in the description below. And of course, to my viewers, I hope I've earned the privilege of your time and viewership. I know Michael has. And until next time, you know what to do.
Thanks, Glenn.